Hello there. Today I watched the first episode of the new series Dead City from the Walking Dead franchise, and now I want to tell you about it. For those of you unaware of The Walking Dead, it's an apocalyptic horror series where a virus has taken over the planet and turned most of the people of Earth into shambling horrors. Dead City follows Maggie Rhee, played by Lauren Cohen, a survivor whose son has been kidnapped. The man who kidnapped him whistled a tune that Maggie had heard before from an old enemy. Hoping to find her son's whereabouts, she tracks down her old foe, Negan, played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, and the two of them head off to find him. Their journey takes them to Manhattan, one of the epicenters of the virus. The borough was cut off by the military early on in the apocalypse, and so there are more than 1 million zombies roaming the streets. The first episode is called Old Acquaintances, and it was directed by Lauren Yaconelli, and it was written by Eli Jordan. In it, we get some backstory between Negan and Maggie, see them meet and set off on their journey, set up a crew of marshals after Negan, and establish the villain of the first season, the Crow. We get a little bit of action between the survivors and the zombies and a few jump scares here and there, but most of the episode is set up for the future. We learn what Negan did to Maggie to make them enemies and how Maggie's dealing with it. And we see them clash on this subject a few times. It makes for some juicy drama, and both Morgan and Cohen nail that bitter tension between the two. We see how brutal the marshals are when it comes to dealing with lawbreakers, and just how terrified people are of them. We also learn about the head marshal, Pearlie Armstrong. He's a family man who gives no quarter when it comes to enforcing the law. Most of the writing is consistent, but one part was a little dumb. One of the marshals gets eaten without putting up a fight, and it was one of the lamest deaths ever. He watches them walk up, and they start eating him without him even screaming. This episode does a great job with tension. It starts off with a brutal zombie killing, and then from there never slows down. Every few minutes we're shown the zombies again, and while they're not as intimidating as other shows' zombies, there are a lot of them. They are everywhere. Once Maggie and Negan get into the city, things get incredibly dicey. The zombies act as a slow-moving force of nature. Those who aren't fast enough to outrun them or strong enough to fight them get killed. They also use them for a lot more than just a scare factor. They constantly show off how rotted and disgusting the corpses have become after such a long time. There's one scene where they open up a garbage bag and find a rotting zombie being eaten by maggots, and it was truly disturbing. The cast is cozy with only a few faces, and Lauren Cohen and Jeffrey Dean Morgan reprising their roles from earlier Walking Dead projects. Maggie and Negan get the majority of the screen time, with a small bit being given to the marshals and some to the Crow and Maggie's son at the end. The two standouts are Cohen and Morgan. Cohen's Maggie is a traumatized survivor who's suffering from debilitating visions of her husband's death. She's trying to hold it together for the sake of her son, but spends the episode on knife's edge. Morgan's Negan still sounds as nasty and jovial as before, but there's a shred of guilt underneath it all. He makes a few funny remarks, and when pushed gives Maggie a piece of his mind. But he's surprisingly cooperative throughout the episode. The other person who stood out was Zeljko Ivanek, who plays the Crow. He only gets one scene, but we see just how chaotic he is, and he makes a big impression. The way he toys with the torture devices in front of Maggie's son was terrifying, and the bored expression after he murdered a man was even better. Visually, the episode is black as midnight, and only uses a few basic sets. We see Maggie and Negan move through some countryside, stay at a motel, and even enter the streets of Manhattan, but almost all of it is done in the dark. The few lit parts show off an impressively empty scene, and the shots at night are so dark that you can barely see anything beyond the characters. The Manhattan sets have a lot more detail to them, but they're still dimly lit and hard to see. The zombies tend to be slow moving and not all that scary one-on-one, but when you see the horde stacked up, they look intimidating. A little bit of action we get between the survivors and the zombies tends to be brutal, like Maggie caving a zombie's skull in with a pipe and having to wipe off the bits of its brain. There isn't much of it though, and they always cut away from the zombies eating people to show a horde of them gathering on top of the corpse. It takes a lot of the punch out of it when you don't see the people struggling to survive. Sound-wise, this episode makes use of a few background instrumentals here and there to try and up the atmosphere in a few scenes. The songs tend to be repetitive, poorly mixed, and insignificant. They add a little bit of tension at best, but never fully match the mood, and they never stand out. They come in too loud at times and compete with the dialogue directly, and when they don't have one of the instrumentals playing, we just get silence. The little bits of ambient noise aren't enough to fill out the space, and so it's left to the actors to carry the scene. It feels like a lot of missed opportunities to add some flavor to the show, which as it stands is a generic zombie show. Overall, Dead City has an interesting cast, and the premise is fairly solid, but the visuals and the soundtrack are holding it back. I think the tension between Maggie and Negan could lead to some truly great storytelling, but I hope they didn't do all night shoots to save on cost. The first episode is fairly entertaining, and we'll see how the rest of the series goes. 7 out of 10. And remember, these are just my thoughts on the episode. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Bye-bye!